we can put it on the project website. And we are going to go ahead and get started. We'll have questions and answers at the end, but for now, we are going to have Robert Yavez with Transportation kick it off. Okay, Robert, it's over to you.
All right. The presentation, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The presentation will be a team effort between staff and the consultant team. My name is Robert Yavez. I'm a transportation planner for the Engineering and Transportation Department. I am the project manager for this project. Marilyn is not here, so it's okay. I'm not going to introduce the people that are going to be presenting. When they take their turn to present, they will introduce themselves. The project we are talking about today strongly support at least 3 City Council priorities. The first is what we commonly refer to as our 20-minute city goal, which is the idea that residents should be able to meet their daily needs within a 20-minute walk, 20-minute bike ride, or 20-minute transit trip. The second is our performance measure for traffic congestion along major streets. And the last is an important goal to allow for sustainable growth and development, which is our community carbon reduction goal. The project aims to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips, reduces congestion, and vehicle miles traveled to help meet our greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Tempe have a sustainable vision, and that is about more than just being green. The goal is to reduce emissions and cultivate resilience by focusing on principles of fiscal responsibility, enterprise, equity, engagement, and effectiveness. You will hear these themes in our discussions today. Next slide, please. We are back to talk about 3 important planning projects that were presented previously. These 3 projects are very related to each other. The first is Transportation Demand Management Plan, or TDM. It's a plan for how the city will operate and manage its multimodal transportation system, and will include strategies to improve system efficiency and effectiveness. The TMA plan, which is an acronym for Transportation Management Association, is about creating a forum for public-private partnerships and collaboration for a shared role of improving community mobility cooperatively. The Mobility Hubs plan is about creating a network of locations where people can easily access transportation alternatives to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips. Next slide, please. This project will accomplish our community sustainability goals and also help us meet our future circulation demands brought about by our planned growth. These projects will encourage local and regional private-public collaboration around common transportation and mobility issues. TDM is about enhancing system efficiency and promoting the use of our already robust multimodal investment. Our TDM plan can demonstrate to the region that is also a cost-effective way of helping relieve our regional congestion issues. TMA is about creating a forum for collaboration among private entities, as well as with public agencies, and joining implementing TDM effectively. A successful TMA will also demonstrate to the region that a TMA will also be productive in helping reduce our circulation issues. And Mobility Hub is about providing accessibility to the transportation infrastructure mode choices, both physically and economically. Mobility Hubs will also provide a means to extend the reach of our transit system by providing the bridge for the first and last mile issue. Next slide. I think it's you, Jim.
Yeah. So Dan, are you on? So Dan, we cannot hear you.
I am, Jim. I'm here.
Okay, there you are. Okay. You want to introduce yourself, Dan?
And Jim, maybe before I get started with the stakeholders, you want to summarize the public meeting topics. But anyway, let's go through the slide. Go to the next slide.
Yeah, so I'm Jim Townsend with Wilson and Company, project manager on the consultant side for the Transportation Demand Management Plan and Transportation Management Association Plan aspects of the project that we're presenting today. Early in the process, we did go out to the public and we had a survey and offered, of course, opportunities for feedback. And the key takeaways that from the input that we received is that many of the residents, stakeholders, and so on were very open to using other transportation choices, options than driving alone. That bicycle, walking, pedestrian, rideshare, and transit modes were already being used by the respondents. And so that aspect is already part of, I'll say, the community fabric of today. And then there are pockets within the city that do have convenient transportation choices. And the graphic on the right identifies the level of impact or support that the respondents felt each one of those aspects of transportation choices provided to the community. And so secure bicycle parking, for instance, and having a convenient area for taxis to access taxis, convenient access to transit, and comfortable walking area, wayfinding, and real-time trip planning all seem to have a higher level of potential impacts or perceived higher levels of potential positive impacts to those that want to access alternative transportation choices. The other elements that were displayed on the graph there, such as having lockers and so on, had a lower response, but still thought could be impactful or somewhat impactful to help provide alternative choices to be made. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dan. Want to introduce yourself, Dan?
Great, thank you, Jim. Dan Marham with Wilson and Company, and I was involved in the initial round of stakeholder interviews. And just before we get into some of the takeaways, just a little background on the stakeholder interviews. Those interviews with the key stakeholders, as identified by the City of Tempe and leadership from the City of Tempe, were conducted to collect input regarding a wide variety of commute and mobility enhancement solutions that were all intended to reduce traffic congestion and travel time along major streets in Tempe. So that was the foundation for the interviews. There were a list of questions that we developed that were distributed to the stakeholders prior to the meetings so that they'd have a little background information and guide the conversation during each of the meetings. As of this date, we've conducted 22 separate interviews with 28 individual stakeholders. So some of those interviews had multiple stakeholders involved that complemented one another. And each one of the stakeholder meetings were conducted virtually and lasted approximately 1 hour. So now on the next two slides, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the takeaways. And in general, there was broad support and even excitement at the stakeholder level for each of the components that we're talking about today, the TDM, the TMA, and the Mobility Hub components of this work effort. It became clear to us in the conversations from a thematic standpoint that a strategic marketing campaign would need to be implemented that focused on education of both residents, the workforce, and visitors to the amenities that could be associated with a TDM and mobility hubs that the TMA may be supporting in terms of implementation. It was also indicated to us in the conversations that the city of Tempe may need to consider methods or means to incentivize both the use of alternative modes of transportation and, in a sense, the willingness of business owners and property managers to support the TDM and the TMA and those mobility hubs, rather than mandating or forcing users and businesses to change their behavior. So it's a balance between providing the options and then maybe some level of incentivization to get involved. We talked about connectivity, accessibility, convenience, and location as the cornerstones for a successful TDM and mobility hub program that would be promoted and supported by the TMA. We talked about the strategic location of mobility hubs potentially being located within a quarter mile of other options on the transportation network in order to boost potential use. And we talked about how the mobility hubs could be scalable depending on the land area and the type of development that was adjacent to the mobility hub strategy across the entire network in Tempe. We talked about how parking structures and garages can be retrofitted to accommodate mobility hubs potentially, and that might even result in less investment being required. And then mobility hubs that are located away from parking structures would need to be designed in a manner where they could withstand or at least help the users cope with the extreme heat that exists in certain months of the year here in the valley. So if we go to the next slide, some additional takeaways were that the complementary nature of express routes and express lanes to support the objectives of the TDM, of the TMA in implementing TDM measures. So we talked about that interrelationship between optimizing travel on the network and maybe providing some lanes where mass transit could operate at a higher level of efficiency within the network. It was indicated to us that it might be easier to introduce these TDM and mobility hub options and strategies in the beginning of the development process. So when a development comes to the city, that maybe this is on the top of the list to talk about how to incorporate TDM measures within the development, how to make sure that a mobility hub strategy is at least investigated to see if it is a candidate for that development project, rather than retrofitting after the fact. We talked about how parking options within the city of Tempe play into the success of TDM measures and then accomplishing the objectives of the TMA. So there's this relationship between the cost of parking, availability of parking, and the, I guess I'll say, the use, the level of use of alternative modes of transportation. It was discussed that many of the business owners would have an interest on the return on investment. And if there were to be investment made in either TDM strategies or mobility hubs, what would the private sector business owners expect to receive in terms of benefit? We talked about how a business owner toolkit might be developed to showcase these benefits. And I think later on in our presentation, you'll hear about some success stories from other parts of the country on how maybe that toolkit to help promote the TMA and the objectives of the TMA has been successful in other communities around the country. It was interesting that in the past experience, some of the business owners and property managers had indicated that their employees were less interested in receiving compensation or bonuses for changing their habits or behavior. But there was still interest in receiving a monetary bonus for not using an assigned parking spot. So again, the relationship between parking and alternative modes of transportation. It was also made clear to us that existing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure needs improvement. So there was an indication that there's always need for improvement, and they felt that further improving that system would lead to more use and more widespread use of the system. And then there was a consistent theme through the stakeholder interviews that indicated the stakeholders were already engaged in this topic because they directed us to some other national publications, including the Association for Commuter Transportation, or the acronym ACT. And they wanted to make sure that we were looking at that document for best practices, along with the experience of our team and our due diligence on the project, because they felt that that document and the documentation associated with that that work product would provide a great foundation for where we're trying to go for the city of Tempe, although custom tailored for application in the city of Tempe. So that's a summary of some of the key takeaways, and would certainly be happy to answer questions maybe at the end of the presentation. Thanks.
All right, I think it's my turn. I'm Chris Bongiorno. I am the owner of Bongiorno Consulting, and I'm a part of the consulting team working specifically on the Transportation Management Association, or TMA, implementation plan. And a lot of what Dan just said is what I'll be working most directly on. Sasha, you can go on to the next screen. And I am a member of the Association for Commuter Transportation and a TDM certified professional. So this is in my area of expertise. So we've been talking about TMAs quite a bit in the last few slides, and just a little bit more on what a TMA is. You probably understood this by now, but it's a collaborative agency or initiative that exists to provide a variety of TDM programs, transportation services, traveler resources, planning and advocacy services, and it can increase staff and technical capacity where it's needed amongst its members or partners. So some examples of TMAs were on the right side of that slide. From that survey, that's fine, Sasha, you can go to the next one. From the survey that Dan mentioned, conducted by ACT of 100 TMAs across the US and Canada, the survey found that the top issues that prompted both the creation of the TMA at the start and the ongoing operation of existing TMAs include congestion mitigation, employee recruitment and retention, increasing transportation options and choices, incorporating demand management strategies into new development, addressing trip reduction requirements when there are regulations in place, and addressing air quality issues. And increasingly, these TMAs are seen as a valuable and in some ways a must-have tool for improving the attractiveness of districts or downtowns in an increasingly competitive environment for employee and employer recruitment and retention. You can go on to the next slide. So that same survey of 100 TMAs found that most of them have been around for more than 10 years, but there are definitely more TMAs being formed every year across the country. The largest share serve a regional audience, while there's still a large number that serve citywide or county jurisdictions, central business districts or downtowns, anchor or activity districts, or suburban business districts. Nearly 2/3 are independent nonprofit organizations, so created or established specifically as the TMA for a specific service area and constituent group. But those other third that are part of a parent organization are most often housed within a government agency, a chamber or a member organization created by a developer or property owner, or by a special or business improvement district. And that's part of what we're exploring as part of this process, is to understand what the best organizational structure would be for a TMA serving Tempe. So we mentioned that one of their core functions is to provide TMA programs and services to a specific geography and constituent group. This can include a variety of TDM strategies that were referenced earlier, and there's a deeper dive into what those strategies are in another portion of this project. They can provide transportation planning services, whether that's specifically to individual commuters or travelers, or to an employment site or a destination that needs some specific targeted work, or they can participate in a broader effort to plan for medium or long-term transportation investments. Already referenced, but the employee and commuter travel information and resources. This can include real-time travel and parking information, ride matching services, trip planning, and access to TDM strategies. In places where there are policies in place that require trip reduction strategies, they can be a very valuable component to compliance with sometimes difficult to understand policies. And a TMA can be the expert that provides that guidance and helps the individuals satisfy those requirements. Some, but not all TMAs get involved in parking management. It really has a lot to do with what their core function is and how they're funded. But many have found that parking management can be a core service. And as Dan referenced, it can be directly tied to TDM strategies. In the case of targeted programs for distinct user groups, TMAs can help fill a gap. So there may be programs on the ground already in Tempe that are serving certain portions of the population, maybe large employers or large destination locations. But maybe there aren't enough programs custom made for small to mid-size employers or for residential properties or things like that. So a TMA can help to fill those gaps. And then lastly, a TMA can be really valuable in performance measurement and reporting, not only for the TMA itself, which is important, but to help others throughout the region, any of its members or constituents, meet their measurement and reporting requirements or goals. Next slide, please. So Dan mentioned that one of the big questions that we're asked when considering establishing a new TMA is, what's the value to me as an employer or as an individual commuter or as a municipal agency in supporting a TMA? What's the return on investment? And there's been a lot of conversation about this nationwide, and there's a few examples of responses on the screen here. And we've actually helped to facilitate some conversation between some of these members or beneficiaries of TMAs in other parts of the country with some of the stakeholders in Tempe to start to uncover what is the value to them as individual members or constituents of a TMA. But we want to understand what the value needs to be for you on the ground in Tempe, and to make sure that those programs and services that would be of most value are incorporated into the TMA structure from the beginning. I think I have one more slide here. This last slide is to outline basically what our next steps are in this process. So we're developing the framework of a work plan and an implementation plan for the next 1 to 3 years of a TMA in Tempe. So we'll be working with stakeholders in Tempe to understand what the TMA's mission, vision, and goals should be, what the ideal organization structure and what the cross-sector partnerships look like, outline the key strategies, programs, and services that should be laid out and implemented in those first 3 years, identify the resources and funding needed to execute those, and then develop performance measures and reporting methods that can be tracked throughout that startup period and incorporated into any longer term plans for the TMA. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sasha.
Thank you, Chris. So my name is Sasha Jovanovic. I'm the consultant project manager for the Mobility Hubs portion of this study. So with that, I'll go into my slides. Just a reminder of what Mobility Hubs are. They are places which combine the resources of multiple transportation into one location, making it easier to live car-free or car-light. Access to jobs, opportunities, and destinations without driving or vehicle ownership is a multi-part strategy that necessitates both good mobility options, that is to move people quickly around the city or region by many different ways, ensuring people have the greatest number of options. But it also requires land use decisions that invite proximity, the design of 20-minute cities or neighborhoods that ensure people can meet their basic daily needs in a smaller geographic area without driving. Mobility hubs are a part of that strategy, bridging those two features together by improving the first and last mile and decreasing some of the longer travel distances that puts many people out of reach from local destinations or regional scale transit services. Mobility hubs will be spread around the city where opportunities permit, in addition to variable indicators like population and employment density, and also short travel proximity to employment destinations, key transit. There will also be an equity focus to where to site mobility hubs as well. Neighborhoods with structurally underserved populations, areas with low median household income and high concentrations of poverty. These will be factors that will be a part of the strategy of siting mobility hubs around the city. This is also something we will be taking input on through the online survey, as well as at the open house this Saturday. So yes. Mobility hubs in neighborhood parks, or more generally speaking, mobility hubs on public property are a major opportunity for siting locations, especially to service areas that are outside of downtown and the Apache Boulevard corridor that are lower in density. Public ownership eliminates much of the complexity of cooperation with property owners, and neighborhood parks are generally accessible to most city residents as well. According to Tempe's 20-minute city report, nearly 80% of the population of the city is within 20 minutes or less low stress walk or bike trip from a park. Mobility hubs hosted by private developments are another potential opportunity to help increase coverage of these resources around Tempe. They are going to be most suitable, of course, where developments are in the urban core, or in higher density built environments where non-driving modes are the best supported. There'll be a core strategy for development seeking to do some of that TDM work, reducing their on-site parking obligations, or wanting to reduce vehicle trips or miles traveled by vehicle generated by their development. The amenities at these mobility hubs will cater towards the users of the development, though they may also be used by the public. And of course, there are developments in Tempe which are going full steam ahead with this strategy, most notably the under construction cul-de-sac project in Tempe, where these images are from. With that, I will pass the presentation back to Robert to go over the remaining schedule.
Apologies, it wasn't working for a while there. There is a public meeting scheduled for today and January 29th. The public meeting on the 29th will be at the library, and it will be live. There will be people there. Please wear your mask. We are continuing to interview stakeholders, to talk with the stakeholders, community and employer stakeholders in February. We will be talking to our technical working group, which includes regional agencies like MAG, ADEQ, Valley Metro, and the county trip reduction group. We will be talking again to Tempe Chamber to make sure that we've heard whatever their concerns were. And we will go back to the Development Review Commission. The City Council subcommittees will also be in February, and we'll go back and final to the Tempe Transportation Commission in March, and then go to City Council in March 24. Next slide. Got it. Shannon, are you here still?
I am here.
Yes, sir. Sorry, you should have done that slide. My
That's okay.
apologies.
No problem. I'm glad you did the slide. I'm here for any questions and follow-up information at all. My contact information is on this final slide.
And if anyone who's joined us has a question, you're welcome to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you could put it in the chat. Or you've got the information there to directly reach out. And just as a reminder, we do have an online survey at tempe.gov/forum that's open through February 8th.
Donna, do you have specifics on the public meeting at the library for Saturday?
Yes, so Saturday we will have a transportation open house. It's in the parking lot, southeast corner of the library, located there at Rural and Southern in Tempe. It's going to be from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., so you're welcome to stop by anytime between then. In addition to our TDM Mobility Hub team, we'll also have staff to speak about our climate action plan, adaptive streets. You'll also get a chance to see the prototypes for some new transit shelters. So come out and you can talk really anything and everything about transportation. And we'll be there in the corner of the parking lot near where the transit shelter prototypes are set up. I am not seeing any questions. So I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.